Well, welcome everybody. Glenn Ruga, the founder and director of the Social Documentary Network. It's so great to see so many faces here today. There are people from all over the world, and it's always so great to see that. People are signed up from Bangladesh, Belgium, the DRC, Egypt, Finland, France, Ghana, Hungary, and other places. It's really exciting. The chat is open, and I encourage people now just to chat and let us know where you're Zooming from. It'd be great to see your names there. And the session is being recorded and will be on our YouTube channel in about 3 to 4 days, and we'll send out an email when that's ready. This is the second of many events we've planned for the SDN 2024 Visual Storytelling Festival. And we're so grateful to have with us here today, Robin Fader, Evelyn Hockstein, Edward Boches, and Maggie Soladay to talk about photography and the struggle for reproductive rights. And before I turn this over to Maggie as the moderator, I'd like to say a few words about the festival and about SDN. There are a lot of new faces here who may not be familiar with SDN, and I know there's a lot of familiar people who are very familiar, but for those who are new to our programming, SDN was created in 2008 as a platform for documentary photographers to create online galleries of their projects to present to a global audience. And to this day, this is still a core part of what we do. And I encourage any documentary photographer out there to consider using the SDN platform to showcase your documentary projects. And in the 16 years since our founding, we've also launched a digital and print magazine, Zeek, to showcase the best work from the SDN platform. We've initiated other programs, including our speaker series, which we refer to as Documentary Matters, which this program is part of. And we also have a very vibrant educational program. And each year we present the Zeek Awards for documentary photography and systemic change. And we'll be exhibiting this year's award recipients at both the Bridge Gallery in Cambridge, Massachusetts, with an opening on April 13th, and at Photoville in Brooklyn with an opening on June 1st. And I hope you can join us at one of those places if you live in one of these areas. And one of our newest and most dynamic programs are the SDN Portfolio Reviews. This year will be on Saturday, April 20th. These are online portfolio review sessions with industry leaders in editorial, publishing, and fine art, where you'll receive professional level feedback on your work and also possibly opportunities to publish or exhibit your work. And this is the first year we're doing the SDN Visual Storytelling Festival, a virtual and in-person festival that started last week and continuing into May. And this is providing a structure for 7 panel discussions, such as this, 5 classes and workshops, the portfolio reviews, and the 2 exhibitions. And we just got in our festival t-shirts, the first of SDN swag. So if anybody would like to purchase a t-shirt, these are on the festival website now. And beautiful 100% cotton t-shirts. They're available now for sale. And you can learn about these programs and all of SDN programs on the socialdocumentary.net website or at zeekmagazine.com. I'd like to welcome all the board members and advisory committee members who are here with us today. And I'd like to acknowledge and thank our sponsor, Digital Silver Imaging, an outstanding digital photo lab in Belmont, Massachusetts. We will have a Q&A at the end of the program, and we may be able to take 1 or 2 questions either during or after each individual presenter as well. If you have a question, please just enter it into the chat, or you can use the raise your hand function and we'll call on you. And in that case, you'll just need to unmute yourself and ask the question directly. We probably won't be able to get to all the questions, but we'll do the best we can given the time that we have available. We have 3 outstanding photographers with us today, Evelyn Hockstein, Robin Fader, and Edward Boches, and Maggie Soladay will be moderating. Maggie is senior photo editor at the Open Society Foundations in New York. Her work with OSF involves addressing racial, economic, and political justice issues around the world through photography. And she's been working in the photography industry for over 25 years. So now let me turn this over to Maggie.
Hi, everybody. Welcome. I'm going to keep saying I've been working in the photo business for over 25 years for like the next 25 years. I'm not going to keep increasing that number. Okay, so the reason I think we're here today is because Roe v. Wade was overturned a little less than 2 years ago. It was in June 2022. The Supreme Court decision that enshrined a national constitutional right to an abortion was 5 days after I was born in 1973. And when the Supreme Court overturned that, this trickle of, I mean, the people who were going to fight this have been fighting it ever since the day it happened. Constitutional law followers know this, but the rest of us who were going through our life thought that we would only continue to enjoy the reproductive freedoms we'd come to expect, and not this rollback. So I think that is why we are here today. At the end of this discussion, I will share a bunch of links with you. One of them is the Guttmacher Institute map of abortion access rights in the US by state, because it's very hard to talk about as a national problem since it's a state's problem now. And these stories that our three photographers are going to share give us a picture into what that's like. And I hope these stories continue to be documented. And we can start with the bios. Bios. I have to introduce you guys. Evelyn Hockstein is senior staff photographer at Reuters and is based in Washington, D.C. She is past president of the Women Photojournalists of Washington, WPOW. She is past president of the Women Photojournalists. Oh, wait, no, sorry, that's typo. She's worked in more than 70 countries for news outlets from the Washington Post to the New York Times. Evelyn's images from January 6th were part of the Washington Post coverage of the insurrection at the U.S. Capitol, which received the Pulitzer Prize for public service. Those images are some of the most iconic images that were taken on January 6th. They're fantastic. Evelyn has won first prize in World Press Photo and Pictures of the Year International, as well as many other photojournalism awards around the world, and she has also exhibited around the world. Robin Fader is Washington, D.C. based. She's a producer and a photographer. She's won multiple Emmy Awards for her work as a producer at NBC, and photography awards for her photography that include the IPA Award and the Julia Margaret Cameron Award for Women Photographers. Currently, Robin's focusing on activism, protest, social justice, and pro-democracy themed photography, particularly as it relates to reproductive freedoms. And Edward Boches is Boston-based documentary photographer, photojournalist, and he lives around the corner from a Planned Parenthood. He has decades of experience shooting for newspapers, exhibiting in galleries, and very recently a very interesting public art collaborative photography project with a neighborhood in Boston. Yeah, from boxers to activists, Edward captures all sides, and you will see that when he gives his presentation. And I think we're good to go. And one of the things I did notice is you guys will see that, like, there's a thank God thread of democracy through all of this work. It's not just about reproductive freedoms. On to you.
So I get to go?
Yep.
Hi, everybody. I'm Robin Fader, and I cannot tell you how thrilled I am to be here and to sit here among these fine people. My big thanks to Glenn and everybody at SDN, and I'm honored to be on this panel with Maggie and with Evelyn and with Edward. So again, my work is focused on activism, protest, social justice, and reproductive themed issues. To be clear, I am a small fish in this pond. I'm a documentary photographer. It's my passion, it's personal. And so it's absolutely clear what side of the aisle I stand on. I had an abortion at the age of 14, pre-Roe, and had to travel out of state to get my abortion care. So that's where it all began. Here we go. I'm going to share my screen. And let's see, make sure I get this right. Whoops, I'm seeing, I'm trying to get it to, this is embarrassing, to go full screen, and I have a whole
Try
bunch.
just
View.
view
Look
slideshow.
under view, look under view.
Yeah, I can't see view because it's covered by, oh gosh.
It's
Here we
covered by
go.
the Zoom
Here we go.
controls. Yeah.
Here we go. Oh, yeah, here we go. Here we go. Sorry about that. Okay. I'm here to show you my ongoing project. Under the umbrella of fighting for our reproductive freedoms, I stand up wholeheartedly for abortion and the rights for choice. I'm also an ally to the LGBTQ community. You'll see photos from me about both. Many don't realize, but it's critical to know that reproductive rights and LGBTQ+ rights are very closely tied. Tied because attacks on reproductive rights are about enforcing heteronormative gender roles and control over how people live their lives, fully and authentically. I began focusing on this work in the fall of in the fall when at the fall of Roe v. Wade in 3 ways: documenting protests around DC, going to the Supreme Court justices' homes to peacefully protest with Our Rights DC, and by joining a local group, the Rainbow Defense Coalition, that helps protect drag story hours from right-wing extremists. Okay, here we go. I am super excited to show you my work. So this was the day that Roe fell, and it was extremely hard to photograph with tears in my eyes. I'm going to rip through a bunch of photos now and show you. So some of these are from various marches and events around DC.
Excuse me, Robin, there's a comment from somebody, if you can move your cursor out of the middle of the screen.
Ah,
Better. Okay.
thank you. So the SCOTUS hearings on mifepristone, the abortion medication drug, happened this past Tuesday, and I noticed these doctors were there to challenge women's rights to use mifepristone. Their sponsoring group, the Alliance Defending Freedom, worked to overturn Roe, and I just couldn't help but get in their faces, especially since Viagra has a 15 times death rate over mifepristone, but here they are refusing to administer it. This is also from Tuesday. And this was a banner with the names of over 500,000 people who signed the People's Petition to protect mifepristone. So the justices of the Supreme Court do not seem to be our guardians of liberty, at least in my mind. And since they're secretive and isolated, the only way to hear the voice of the people is to go to their homes. So completely obeying the law and showing up with signs, flags, chants, sometimes chalk. I'm with the group, Our Rights DC, that goes there to tell them our concerns. And what's really great is that their neighbors come out and greet us and thank us for being there. This is outside of Thomas's house. It's always very playful, bubbles, chants are fun, and it's usually pretty heavily occupied by law enforcement. So as the group is walking toward a home, they'll be chanting, singing. And again, obeying the law by not stopping, but continuing to walk and basically chant in low volume voices. So now inside and outside of drag story hours, there's lots of protesting against this in the district, Maryland, and Virginia. Inside, it's pure family fun with bubbles, songs, books about joy, inclusion, empowerment, acceptance, and more. I am the only one outside of a member of the Rainbow Defense Coalition and the parents that are allowed into the actual story hours. Outside, there's a wall of volunteers with rainbow umbrellas and joyful music to shield the families and children against the messages of hate from the radical protesters and make sure that they have safe passage to enter. Last year, about 30 Proud Boys showed up in Silver Spring, Maryland. The police stood by and watched as the tensions rose and blood was drawn. They got very close and tried to stop families from entering and screaming, obviously, horrible things and threatening the crowd. This is one member of the Rainbow Defense Coalition who was trying to guide a family safely inside. So today, there are lots of bomb threats, and they're just significantly on the rise at all story hours around town, forcing entire streets to shut down. It really makes me sad that these joyful and educational events are under attack. And I will stop sharing now. Thank you, everyone, for watching.
Well, thank you. We do have time for a few questions directly. And there's one question from Victor. Why do you shift between black and white and color in your images?
You know, it's when I feel that color is going to be more powerful. Oftentimes I feel I dominantly go with black and white because I feel it filters out unnecessary color and gets to the core of the emotion of an image. But certainly for the drag story hour stuff, it's all about color and life and goodness and fun. So I keep the color there. Hope that answers the question.
Great, yeah. So any other questions for Robin before we move on? You could just unmute yourself and ask if you'd like. Put it in the chat or raise your hand.
I had a question I'd been wanting to ask. I'm starting to notice, and I noticed in these pictures that protesters on the right have taken the signs from abortion rights activists and pride marches, and they seem to, so on first glance, you think you're looking at a pro-choice demonstration, but you're actually looking at an anti-abortion message. Like, what have you noticed going on there? Because I saw it in both projects.
Yeah, it happens. It happens a lot. And a lot of times I've noticed that they'll actually take an actual sign, an abortion rights sign, and they'll just scribble over it or change it to make it their own. It can be very deceiving. And even the chants that you hear at the marches will be changed to reflect the other side's view. It's just a thing that happens. I'm not sure I have an answer for that. I have been confused on occasion too. I'll look up and I'll see a sign and I'm like, who are they with?
As a photo editor, I've gotten tripped up, and in covering like abortion rights struggles from Latin America across the world, there's color coding and there are different looks, but actually lately, very recently, I think I've noticed that people are taking the look and identity of the side they're opposing and like adopting it. Yeah, anyway, just thank you.
It's lack of creativity, I guess.
Maybe. I think it might be more nefarious.
Oh yeah, oh, it's definitely nefarious, but it's also kind of cheating.
All right, why don't we hold off any other questions until the end? Our next presenter will be Evelyn Hockstein. Okay, Evelyn.
Hey, everybody. Thanks for having me, Robin. That was amazing seeing your work. I see you in the field a lot, so very cool to see that presentation. I'm going to start with about 10 years ago, I did my first project trying to show what was going on with abortion access. And I don't think 10 years ago, I thought Roe v. Wade would actually be overturned, even though people who were working for reproductive rights were afraid that that was coming. And there were a lot of trap laws, which were laws that targeted abortion providers and made it very, very difficult for women to access abortion, even in states where it was still legal. So I think I was interested initially because it was sort of abortion access was very unfair, like divided between sort of where you lived. It was just luck of the draw. Like if you lived in Washington, D.C., you could easily access an abortion. But for a woman in Mississippi, it was like nearly impossible. And it was the law of the land. And I was really interested in looking at that. So my very first project, I was a freelancer. And I am going to adopt Maggie's. I've been a freelancer. I mean, I've been a photojournalist for 25 years, and I think I'll just stick with 25 years at this point. But I'll share this very first project with you. So let me do that. And it should be right here. So okay, does that look okay? Because I can't really see fully.
Yeah,
okay.
Yeah, that looks good.
So I'm going to click through these, but these are two clinics, one clinic in Jackson, Mississippi, and one in Birmingham, Alabama. One was a Planned Parenthood, and one was the Jackson Women's Health Organization, which was the clinic at the center of the Dobbs case, which overturned Roe. So that's where I started my work. This is a doctor going into work, being filmed by anti-abortion protesters. This is a nurse and a woman about to have an abortion. And what's very interesting is this nurse actually, I went back to this same Planned Parenthood last year, right before Roe was overturned, and she still worked there. And it's just kind of like full circle to me to like, I started this, she was still there, and now that clinic is closed. So you'll see her later on. This is in Jackson, Mississippi. These are the clinic defenders. And people often ask me about access and how I get access. I didn't know I had access to this clinic, but I didn't know these clinic escorts, but I got to know them and talk to them, and they gained my trust. And when the SCOTUS leak happened before Roe was overturned, I was able to, because of this project that I did 10 years earlier, go immediately back to the Jackson clinic and reconnect with these clinic escorts after the SCOTUS leak came out, and take some pretty powerful photos. And you'll see the photos from 10 years later.
Mm.
Most of these images were never published. Some were, but not the majority of them.
Maybe just slow down a little bit, give us a little bit more time on the images.
Sorry. Yes, I'm happy to. I can even just quickly just go back through here. My next slideshow is time, so I can't get ahead of myself. This is the director of the clinic, Shannon, and she was actually, I think, Time Magazine's Person of the Year last year, and she she's just was running Jackson Women's Health. She's now moved to New Mexico, where you can still get an abortion, because you cannot get an abortion in Mississippi. I think that is the end of that. Let me close this. Actually, I'm just going to stop sharing for 1 second and do a different share screen. Okay. So I'm going to show this slideshow. This is a body of work that I have worked on for the past 3 years, since I joined Reuters. I was a freelancer up until 3 years ago. And very early on, I mean, I think I joined the first week of April, 2021, and the SCOTUS leak came out, I believe, sometime very soon after I joined. And I think one of my very first assignments was my boss, who's very supportive of abortion coverage. And I think, it's very difficult to cover abortion access. So, I struggle with access. I struggle getting, just doing stories, coming up with story ideas, but she was very supportive, and she said, can you go to Mississippi? And luckily I had those contacts that I mentioned that I made 10 years ago. So I sort of started there, and we'll see some of these. This is not in any order, but this is Mississippi. And then I kept working on the story, and then I followed a traveling doctor, Dr. Tien, and I met her in Oklahoma after Texas banned abortion, or made the 6-week heartbeat law, whatever, SB 8, before Roe was overturned, and all these women were like flooding to Oklahoma, which then made abortion illegal. And then so Dr. Tien was one of these doctors that was flying from state to state to provide abortion. So you'll see some of that. You'll see some pill clinics. You'll see lots of protesters in Michigan before they voted to protect abortion constitutionally. You'll see the overturning of Roe v. Wade outside the Supreme Court, similar to what Robin covered. So a whole variety, and just jump in and ask questions if things are not clear. You'll see some pictures of women who've traveled from driven 10 hours to go to New Mexico to get abortions. You'll see more from the Pink House in Mississippi. So let me just start showing this, and then I can sort of jump in and talk more about it. Do you guys see, is there a green box?
No,
Or is it, okay,
no, it looks
okay.
good.
Okay, looks. Let me slow it. Well, I think it's okay.
Can you slow it down? You want to stop it for a
Yeah,
second?
let me slow it down. Sure. Yeah, I realize that maybe it's a little bit fast. Here we go.
Do 5 seconds a slide.
Sure. Let me just figure out how to. Okay, we'll just start over. So this is on the right is that same nurse that I mentioned, and this is
We're not seeing the images now. At least
You're
I'm
not.
not.
Okay, let's see. Let's try this again. Do you see anything?
We're seeing all the images.
All the images. Okay, I'm gonna.
Go to slide.
Okay.
There we go.
That looks
Okay.
good.
All right, here we go. Back to, so this is Dr. Tian. Well, this is a pill clinic in New Mexico. This was the day Roe v. Wade was overturned. Because this doesn't look like 5 seconds.
No. Can you do it
Sorry.
manually and just go through them?
Yeah, I'm gonna do that. Let me just pause it. Sorry. I can't see my mouse. So here we go. Let's try one more time. We're gonna wait for spacebar. Okay, can you see that?
Yes.
All right, here we go. We've seen that. So this is in Texas. Sorry, excuse me, just over the border from Texas, like 1 mile over the border in New Mexico. This is a doctor who had a clinic in Texas and opened a pill only clinic just over the border. And basically women were driving from all over Texas, crossing the border into New Mexico. And people are very fearful about, you take the first abortion pill and then you generally go back home and you're crossing the border back into Texas. And this is an issue where women are worried about being prosecuted for taking that second pill because you take it 24 hours later in a state where abortion is illegal. So I don't know if I have an image of it, but even like the packaging doesn't say he gives you a package to go home with, and it doesn't say like what the medication is, but just the directions to take it, just for precautions, because there's so much fear around crossing state lines. This is just protest in Nashville. Tennessee is one of the strictest, abortion. You can't have an abortion there. This is inside a Planned Parenthood in Jacksonville, and they're discussing Florida was going to a 15-week abortion ban. This is people trying to stop women from going into the clinic in Mississippi. So this woman, Andrea, she was running clinics in Oklahoma and Texas that were both shut down, and she moved to Carbondale, Illinois to open a new abortion clinic, and she's now moved her whole family there. But prior to her uprooting her family from Texas to Illinois, she was traveling every week. And so this was her at her home in Texas with her daughter getting ready to travel to Illinois for a work week. And that's Dr. Braid, who happens to be her father, and they were setting up the clinic. This woman and her boyfriend drove about 9 hours from Dallas to Albuquerque to get an abortion. This is an interesting story. This is the main street in a town called Bristol, Tennessee, and Bristol, Virginia. Literally, the border runs down the main street. Abortion is legal in Virginia, illegal in Tennessee. So a clinic moved, again, like 1 mile over the border from Tennessee into Virginia. This is in Michigan, ahead of their vote to enshrine abortion rights. And this mass happened like right outside this abortion clinic, like the day before Election Day. This is back in Jackson, Mississippi. DC. I want to say this is in New Mexico. I don't remember. Texas. This is one of Dr. Tien's patients. Oops, sorry guys. Just the waiting room. These are all patients from Texas. I mean, obviously, even the doctor put up a sign, welcome East Texans to New Mexico. This is one of the nurses taking a break. This is in Texas, right before abortions were stopped when SB 8 was enacted. And this is, so the lady in blue is a anti-abortion demonstrator trying to get this woman to turn around and offer her literature. And obviously you have a clinic escort trying to get her inside the parking lot safely. Mifepristone, you know, these were all taken at a clinic. Mifepristone, that was in New Mexico. This is a woman who traveled from Texas to New Mexico. And she's crying because she's talking to her mom on the phone, and she lied to her mom about where she was. And I think her mom knew where she was. And she was just trying to convince her mom that she had traveled for work and no other reason.
If I could just stop on that picture for a second, because it might reflect on a lot of pictures. How do you find yourself in this location, in this woman's hotel room?
Yeah, yeah, thanks. That's a good question. I was at the clinic, Dr. Braid's clinic, and talking to a lot of the women there and interviewing them. And, you know, her name was Caitlin. She was amenable, just explained, you know, I'm a journalist. I was with my reporter colleague as well on this trip. And we just said, you know, this is what we're trying to do. We'll keep you anonymous, but could we come and talk to you further, you know, in your hotel room? And I think, you know, she said, sure, you know, come by. And, you know, she didn't want to fully like expose her identity, but I think she understood how difficult this situation was because it was so difficult for her. I mean, she got funding she'd never been on a plane before. She got on an airplane by herself. She got funding from abortion funds. She had like meal vouchers. She was just totally, I think it was just a really overwhelming experience for her, just the travel part. And then obviously, you know, I'm sure it was not an easy, I'm not sure, I don't know, but I don't think it was an easy decision for her to make. She was already a mom, but she was very clear-headed about the decision that she wanted to make. But the travel and the difficulty of getting an appointment and getting the funds together to go out of state, it was just also overwhelming to her. And I think she recognized that she could share this experience in a safe way. So that's how it came to be. I mean, just asking and you know, there's a trust there. This is Dr. Braid. And I mean, I have so much, you know, I'm obviously in this clinic. This woman just had a surgical abortion. And I think I just very clearly explained to people that I can tell this story. I don't need to show their faces, but I'm trying to find moments or intimacy or just, you can tell, you can get so much out of the story without showing a person's face. And I've learned that. Now it helps that I can show the nurses' faces, obviously, but just their hands and her hair and the body language, it's really enough. I almost don't even try to ever show the patients at this point. It just doesn't seem that important to get that extra level of access. This is in the waiting room of the Albuquerque clinic. This is outside of the Jackson, the Pink House as it's called. Some very weird protest art in Michigan. I don't know if we call it art, just mutilated baby dolls. This is in Austin, Texas after SB 8. There's more of Dr. Tien. Michigan. Dr. Tien. I think that's it. So. Stop
Right,
sharing.
remarkable work, really extraordinary images, regardless of what the subject matter is. They're just really beautiful images, but really powerful story.
Thank you.
Maggie, do you want to say anything before we move on? Do you want to comment on Evelyn's work?
Well, I was going to at the end, but I'm going to share links to the two stories where she followed the doctor so that everyone can read and see the full stories, because it's worth it to get a sense, like Dr. Tien and Dr. The father-daughter.
Yeah, Dr. Braid and Andrea.
Braid. I was going to say Baird. Yeah, like those two stories are really worth checking out, seeing all the photos and reading the reporting that was done as well. I'm going to share those links.
Oh, thank you. Appreciate it. I do see some questions, not to jump that I'm happy
Yeah, it seems like a few people asked about permission. So the last person was Robin, who asked if you obtain releases.
So no, I don't obtain releases. That's a really tricky thing with photojournalism. I know in the TV world that it's more common to get releases, and I've had some issues where I haven't asked for releases, and then in other subject areas, and I've been targeted, and people say I didn't have permission to take these photos. But I think it's generally like something I would avoid, and it's not something we regularly do anyway. So no, I don't. And the question to have I ever been able to embed with anti-abortion people? I've tried very many times to get into crisis pregnancy centers and even do some stuff about adoption or people that they've convinced not to have abortions, and I have not succeeded. But I want to cover that, and I will keep trying to get it to do that as well.
All right, well, thanks for that. Really powerful body of work. We'll move on to our third and last presenter, Edward Boches.
Greetings. And I'm just going to put my screen up. And hit play here. Okay, so I am as Maggie said, a Boston-based documentary photographer. I've really only been photographing for 8 years. I spent my career as a writer in advertising, and then 10 years as a full-time professor at Boston University. And I think of myself as a creative activist who uses photography to sort of fight for the causes I believe in, which are housing, arts, immigration, farming, homelessness, and lots of social justice activism. So the work that I have it may look like a project, but to me, it's a large subset of a much bigger project on social justice activism in Boston. And in fact, so it's all Boston based. In fact, the first slide is something from a project that's about Choose a Side, This is America. And it's really a project about the divisiveness in our country across every single subject, no matter what it is. And I think that's reflected a little bit in this work. Let me move this. Let me just move this out of the way so I don't get a note that tells me to. Okay. So I happen to live around the corner from a Planned Parenthood, and I've lived here about 5 years, and it's right in between where I live and where I do my food shopping. So I walk by it all the time. And at first I didn't think a lot of it, but for as long as I've lived here for 5 years, there are always people outside, almost exclusively pro-life, standing. I'm sorry? Standing and protesting, holding signs, in some cases, quite graphic. Someone needs to mute, I think.
Yeah, I just muted him.
Okay. And usually they don't bother anybody. They hold their rosaries and they do some praying, and sometimes they sing a little bit, but in general, they just stand there. But for hours a day, 12 months a year, rain, snow, whatever. And I always think they have sort of a look about them that I don't really have to talk about. You just tend to see it in their faces. The majority of them are white men. And the most aggressive they tend to get is to hold, some kind of graphic picture. And they're not really all the same. They're there for a lot of different reasons. So and every now and then I'll have a conversation with him, and sometimes I'm feeling snarky. And in this case, I asked him, I asked the gentleman, I don't remember his name, do you think that you're doing volunteer work here? And he says to me, oh, yes, I'm doing volunteer work for the Lord. And I asked him, do you do any other volunteer work? And he said, absolutely. I bring blankets and food every week to the homeless at Melnia Cass. That's sort of the drug-addled corner in Boston, where the worst of the worst cases of homelessness and drug addiction. And he says, and I serve food at St. Francis House, which is a shelter, 2 days a week. So I'm almost catching myself, because I'm inclined to think, oh, there's not going to be anything about him that I would like or admire, and it turns out to be completely wrong. And I started to realize, oh, there's a complexity in some of these characters. On the other hand, this is John, and I had a chat with John one day, and I asked him what was his motivation for being there. He's there all the time, and he said, well, I've done my research. I'm an engineer. I did all my research, and you can do it too. If you check out all the census information, you will realize that in America, we are having fewer babies, and in the Muslim countries, they are having many more babies. And if we don't stop women from having abortions, there will be more of them than there will be of us. Not a lot you can say to somebody after that conversation. So I took a photograph and moved on. Interestingly, with this crowd, it's usually the women who are the most aggressive. And a couple of times I've stepped in front of them when they were sort of trying to restrain a patient going into Planned Parenthood. And they were more than happy to turn their lecture and resistance towards me. The other thing I noticed about them, frankly, is they have really boring signs. They're straightforward and they're effective in their communication, but they have zero personality whatsoever. So in Boston, when the Supreme Court overturned Roe v. Wade, as you can imagine, there was mayhem. This is a college town with a tremendous number of young women and students, and so the protests went on and on, over and over, week after week, and suddenly you were seeing people in the streets that you weren't ever seeing counter protesting outside the Planned Parenthood, and they were loud and they were vocal and they were angry. Of course, if you photograph any kinds of actions and protests, there's a tendency for a lot of them to look alike because they're people holding signs. So at least what I try to do is at least get as close as I can and get faces, because I think there's a little bit more emotion in faces. And same as Robin found, the trans community was a big participant in all of these rallies, and a remarkable number of women and daughters. I'm not sure the daughters in every case knew what was going on, but what you could see was the concern and the fear in moms' faces for the fact that their daughters' rights were being taken away and denied, and that this was the government imposing itself on people's lives and bodies in a way that they shouldn't. And there was also this sense of I don't know, sort of like this, I can't believe this, resignation, kind of frustration in a lot of the faces. And I was always amazed to me that just a picture of someone's expression can say so much about how they're feeling without any words to go with it. So that's sort of what I tend to focus on a lot when I cover action, so that I'm not filling a frame with a lot of signs. That being said, there are some good signs, and they're interesting when different family members are holding them. Which is another thing. It's also interesting how many families are there, how many people with kids. And I happen to be pro-choice, despite the fact that my two children are adopted, and I wouldn't have a family if their biological mothers had chosen adoption. The press was out in a big way, as were all the politicians. Markey, Warren, I don't know what Al Franken was doing there, but he made a trip from Minnesota to Boston to be at a couple of these protests. And there were women who have been doing this for, 30, 40 years, and others who might have been at their first one. And the stories were quite different because this woman told me had asked about her tattoo because it was gray and charcoaly. And she told me that she had lived in a state where she knew that her preborn child, was going to have some serious birth defects, and she was denied getting an abortion. And her baby died shortly after being born. And she had this tattoo made from the child's ashes, along with the ink. And it was a really sort of moving story, just sort of listening to what she went through. And you'll notice, of course, that for some reason, women's signs and the pro-choice signs are far more interesting and creative than the men's signs. And I don't really mean that as a joke. I think what I mean when I make that point is that there's a uniform, very consistent, collected way of thinking, in my mind, among the pro-lifers. And that even if they have different motivations, they're very much about the group of them. Whereas I found that in the pro-lifers, in the choice group, it's much more individual. The reasons, the motivations, the feelings, etc., come from an individual person's perspective as opposed to any kind of group think. And this was taped on the back of a woman who probably was in her late 80s. So obviously she's been doing this for a long time. So anyway, as soon as that happened, it also seemed to embolden the pro-life crowd. And there's an organization called the Men's March, Christian Catholic organization of some sort. And they took their inaugural national men's march to Boston and called it Into the Belly of the Beast, which was their way of saying this is the most liberal, progressive city, so we should take our march there. And again, I don't think I have to say very much about what these folks all look like. They definitely were not local to Boston. And they talked a lot about religion and humanhood and etc. But there was an anger inherent, both in their voices, in their speeches, and how they talked, and how they looked, and how they confronted passersby. They marched from Planned Parenthood through this entire city of Boston to the State House. And what was interesting about this is I've been to, dozens and dozens of actions in the pro-choice space, and I never saw any police escorts. They had a bicycle police escort. They had 40 motorcycle police escort. They were, as protected and covered as you could imagine. And of course, the police are saying it's about public safety, but it's just sort of interesting who turned out to support them. And that's my editorial comment, because that's a statue of Abigail Adams on the Commonwealth Mall, sort of glaring at the Men's March as they make their way to the State House. I don't know how they found out about it. I've never seen the clowns anywhere else, but for the 2 years in a row that there has been a men's march in Boston, the clowns have shown up to accompany them, flanking them on the sidewalk all the way from Planned Parenthood, the 2.5 mile walk down to the State House, playing Pop Goes the Weasel and shouting and screaming and making sure that the men know that they have adversaries. The other interesting thing about Massachusetts is we have all women leaders pretty much in the state, which is fantastic. And it's also wonderful for this cause. Within 2 days, Kaczmarek's decision in Texas to ban mifepristone, Massachusetts had officials had called a press conference. Healy announced that the state was stockpiling mifepristone, and no woman in Massachusetts would ever have to worry about receiving reproductive health care, and that we would even protect every single provider in Massachusetts from any kind of lawsuits from states that did not allow abortion any further. And Massachusetts is an old Irish crowd in government, and to go to this thing and have Governor Healy and Attorney General Campbell and Mayor Wu and Warren and Ayanna Presley be the leaders of a place where I lived, it was just awe-inspiring and wonderful. And I think I had practically tears in my eyes, as did many other people there, to see the strength and the courage of these leaders. But as we all know, the battle and the struggle are going to continue for a long time. They're not going anywhere, and it takes a lot of people to keep fighting and working at it. Nurses, volunteers. This was from a project that had nothing to do with reproductive health care. It was a project of volunteers, and a woman who works at a medical care facility. And her quote, I believe, reproductive justice is one of the most important elements needed to achieve true gender equality in any society, and that patients seeking this deserve radical empathy and support. So for me, anyway, it is about this subject, but it's sort of also about resistance and movements, social justice, and activism. And Boston's a good place to be doing that.
Fantastic work, fantastic presentation. Thank you, Edward. So we have one question from John Rudolph. Any attacks or threats against you when you were covering the anti-abortion crowd?
No, in fact. And frankly, I feel like I've gotten pretty good at getting in people's faces without them feeling that I'm threatening them. And I don't consider it hypocritical to smile at them and talk to them and give them the time of day, because I'm a big believer that even if you're completely and totally in disagreement with somebody, that you should still engage, and you should have a civil conversation, and you should listen to what they have to say. You don't have to change your mind. You don't have to agree, but you actually could learn something, which is a sort of this other project I'm working on called Meet a Stranger Every Day, where I think all of us should talk to people who aren't like us, and try to connect more, because we're so unified around our like-minded groups. So no, I've never had a problem.
Can I encounter, I'm just going to jump in. Sorry, your presentation was awesome, but I always talk to the anti-abortion demonstrators. I say my name, I say I work for Reuters, I say exactly what I'm doing, why I'm there, story I'm covering, chit chat. It's just the best way to approach anyone, I think, with openness. And, of course, in all sides, I've gotten pushback from, it could be anything. It doesn't have to just be abortion coverage, but that's how I approach all sides of covering anything. So it's a great idea. I like your talk to a stranger every day. It's important.
All right, so why don't we just open this up for any questions about what we saw today? If you want to ask a question, you can put it in the chat, you could raise your hand, or you could just unmute yourself and go ahead and ask the question.
Well, hi, I'll jump in. Excuse me. Oh, I guess I don't have my camera on. I'll do that for courtesy. Hi, everyone, and thank you so much for these magnificent presentations. Very moving. I have a question about how a freelancer or independent photographer gets pictures out into the world to have an effect, other than on one's friends and website. I think, Edward, that's probably directed mostly to you, because I assume you're freelancing. And
Yeah.
how do you get the word out?
Well, a few things. One, I obviously put many of my projects on Social Documentary Network, and then I encourage Glenn and Digital Silver and myself and my friends to share those stories. I'm a big believer in sharing my work with the causes and the organizations that also share the beliefs of the subject. So, like, I make my images available to Planned Parenthood and to reproductive equity and to ACLU here in Boston and to a few others, and they're free to use them on their websites or in social if they want to. I've done a couple things for Associated Press, but they have their own staff, and it's harder to, as a freelancer to get that thing. But and you get asked that a lot, like, oh, the old days of Life magazine, and everyone would see. Well, it's a different world. It's totally fragmented, and guess what? Instagram is an incredibly powerful platform if you know how to use it properly, and if you know how to seed your work with other people who will repost it, and collectively the audience can get pretty big. Not to touch, but the last comment is, the Jewish faith is the saying that he who saves one life saves mankind. And my attitude is, you know what? If you have a photograph and it touches one person, you've done your job.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
So I'd like to say, and I would ditto many of the things that Edward just talked about. I'm not pushing my stuff out there with a whole lot of gusto. Because it is controversial and because I do have a bias that's very obvious. But what I've noticed is that when I put my things out on Instagram or Facebook, or if it's given to the entities that are involved, the feedback I get back is, thank you so much for showing us what is happening, and the detail and the minutia of being out there with people is very, very much respected. I'm not expecting any grand feedback or any grand acknowledgement for what I do. I mean, the fact that I won at the age that I am at, and just starting this, the fact that I've won a couple of documentary awards is like it for me. It's like, this is it, because that means it's out there, and they're out there in the world, because international awards, and that means the world to me. I doubt that I will get any publication wanting to take my stuff. It's just, I don't think that would ever happen.
Oh, Robin, I disagree. As a photo editor, I do wish your Rainbow Coalition photos were available on the wires or some other way, because until we worked together on this project, I wouldn't have known about your work. And you do have special access to groups. Both stories you shared today, a lot of other people do not have access to. Access. If only you were up on the wires. And when I'm researching these issues, I stumbled on those photos. They're some of the best I've seen of people protecting families going into a drag queen story hour. Or, like, I have not seen I've seen some of the coverage of the demonstrations in front of the justices' homes. I've seen them they're on the wires, like other people were there, but that doesn't mean that, like, you're consistently there with the group for actions that no one else might be grabbing. So I'd look into it. And then to answer the question for Rivka, like, it's, for anyone who can, there are the wires, like Reuters, AP, they're Getty, they're the top, but there are definitely other agencies out there. I could list them. But yeah, it's like sometimes when you have access, like Edward and Robin, and well, Evelyn, you're good. Yeah, sometimes I do wish, I'm like, God, if only I had known. I was looking for the Rainbow Coalition, and nothing's online, and they didn't answer my email. That's my world.
Okay, well, we'll have to talk afterwards, because I would love to get that story out there. I think that's a really important one, and it's growing. It's really growing. The threats are coming fast and furious, and it's a real shame.
Maggie, can I ask you, as working in the nonprofit sphere, what are the opportunities within large nonprofits to use freelance work like this?
They're pretty good. That would be that would be a whole nother hour.
Yeah, it would be. Yeah.
But yeah, there are also other ways to collaborate with nonprofit orgs and the foundations that fund those nonprofit orgs. Edward,
I want to make a comment on that, because interestingly, I think this is something that affects every single not professionally employed photographer, is how do you get your work out there? This is not a pitch for me, but I do give a frequent talk to camera clubs across the country called Thinking Beyond the Photograph, Finding Purpose for Your Work. And the entire presentation is based on 7 or 8 case studies where I've done only the work that I wanted to do, but then I realized, oh, this not-for-profit organization or the city of Boston or something else might be interested, and is there a way to collaborate? And it's resulted in exhibits, public art installations, books, postcards for sale, money raised for these organizations, etc. And frankly, it's a model that if you just embrace that way of thinking, anybody can do it. And I have case studies of other people who embraced the model, and it's worked for them as well. So were someone have a camera club or that kind of organization and they ever wanted a chat, I'm happy to do that. Because I do think it's a challenge, and you got to find alternative ways rather than, like, juried shows and submitting to media.
That first project that I did 10 years ago, I was a freelancer. Most of those images I couldn't find anyone to publish them. I don't know if they weren't interested in abortion access or didn't think it was such an important story, and look where we are now. But it was a challenge for me to get people to pay attention to abortion access when I first embarked on this.
So I'm curious, Evelyn, do you have any thoughts about what you might do next? Are you going to do any follow-ups with the people that you've photographed so far?
Yeah, I mean, I've got a few ideas. It's an election year. Reuters is definitely being supportive and wanting me to get some more stories done. It's challenging to get access, obviously. And I work in the Washington Bureau, which is extremely busy, and I travel all the time. So I have to find the balance between just doing my regular Washington coverage and stories. But I'm lucky to have a very supportive editor. So I have 3 or 4 things in mind, but will they come together? I don't know. That's the mystery of trying to do documentary, storytelling. It's really hard. It's hard for me now with all the access I have. It's hard. It's, so I hope to, yes, that's my goal for this year, is to get, gosh, it's already March, but yeah, to put up a couple more stories this year.
I'm about to share the 2. I'll start sharing links. The first link I shared was to the Guttmacher Institute map and it shows a map of the United States with the most and least restrictive. I found that graphic was one of the easiest ways to understand what's going on in the US. One of the things Evelyn didn't add is that she pitched the 2 stories I'm about to share right now to Reuters. So it's not that she was assigned this, she pitched and was awarded the ability to do this. So there is also pitching. If you've already got relationships with organizations, whether news or a nonprofit or something else, yeah.
I mean, I think, it's amazing that Reuters let me do these very, I don't know what's going to happen. Let's try to do these abortion stories. But I think, I was already a staffer there, but there was a lot of I don't know if I'm going to get it. Let's see what happens. And for the Dr. Braid and Andrea's story, that was 4 trips worth of, it was a lot. But I think to your, I kind of lost the train of thought, but I was within an organization, and it was sort of go do abortion coverage, and then how do you make it happen? So yeah, these were definitely self-generated. And I've done other stories too, but like that Virginia, Tennessee story was something I had pitched. And that all these little ideas come from all the networking and people you meet, and you get a little kernel of an idea. So I think that's the most important thing, is just talking to as many people as you possibly can.
Does anybody believe there's a network of photographers on the other side? Just as today we're seeing 3 photographers who clearly are from the pro-choice side. Are there pro-life photographers that are doing the same things you're doing?
That's a good question, Rob. Maybe you know more, but I see what I would call like activist photographers out there on the other side all the time. I don't know where their images necessarily go or how they're used, but I wouldn't doubt that in different publications, maybe church publications, things like that, their images are published.
Or maybe on the internet a lot too, the web, social media.
Yeah. There are plenty of people with cameras, that's for sure.
There are plenty of people with cameras, and you could sort of tell because they're just following their own. They're not talking to anyone else, and they're usually like Newswire. I mean, other like very far right-wing entities. A lot of them have their own photographers, or not still. I'd say they're mostly videographers that are there taking images. That's what I've seen.
Yeah, I think like exactly. And a lot of things are used on the internet and social media posts that I may not be coming across, but yeah, they're used for sure.
Yeah, or Twitter or live streaming in some way.
Yeah.
A lot of that going on.
Any other questions out there? And you could just unmute yourself and go ahead and ask if you do. Or raise your hand and I'll call on you.
I was just going to add, if somebody doesn't have a question, there are, some frequent folks that show up in DC. There's one particular group called the PAAU, the Progressive Anti-Abortion Uprising folks. And they are the ones that had attacked an abortion clinic. They went in, they prevented people from going in, they live streamed the whole thing. And now 9 of their members are facing 11 years in prison for felony charges. They also stole 115 fetuses and used those fetuses for PR purposes. So a lot of those posters that you may see may come from images that they've taken pictures of. And they're probably the most radical and extremely organized. They'll show up with huge sound systems and speakers, lots of speakers. And somebody had asked Edward if he had had any difficulty photographing. And I find that when I show up and I'm there in front of them with my camera, it's like theater. They want their photos taken. They are very excited. They will pose, they will do this, they will do that. And it's just a phenomenon.
I think that's across the board that people like having their photographs taken.
Unless they're little kids. But people love it when you're interested in who they are and what they do.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, this is Stephanie Hyman and I'm from the New Republic. And I just wanted to say, Robin, I'm really interested to hear everybody's perspective. And I'm trying to be camera off because I'm not in a professional environment look at all today. But Robin, I wanted to say that from our newsroom perspective, we are aware of that group and we are aware of their posturing in front of photojournalists. And we have made effort to not publish their images.
Mm-hmm. Great.
Yeah. I mean, I saw Robin the other day at the MIFI protest when the oral arguments were happening, and it was such theater. That's just a political theater. And do you take like one person that's dressed in some crazy getup that really can attract the attention of everybody. But like, is that really telling the story of what's happening outside of the Supreme Court? So I find there's always a balance to kind of look at who's there, what are they protesting, how many are on each side, what is the actual story of the day, and maybe like try to not jump too quickly into like the extreme carnival vibe that's going on, because is that news? What is the news value? I guess I'm always looking for the news value, and I sort of try to weigh all of that. It's very easy to get caught up in the circus of it all. But sometimes you want to show the circus because it's like so human nature. It's so fascinating, interesting. You want to document it, but yes, to a news value, you know, you have to figure that all out in your calculations, I guess.
Right. Yeah, you're going into that same setting is very different than mine. I mean, I am looking for the variety on both sides, and it's, you know, having been to so many of these, a lot of the times it's just somebody having a sign and then somebody putting their sign in front of theirs, and there's this dance about who can get theirs in front of the others the longest, with the most amount of photojournalists standing before them trying to get, you know, an image. It's crazy. It's like you can capture that at every single event. But it's, I find it fascinating. I also found this last time very dizzying, and I don't know, maybe I'm getting tired of going to all of these and seeing this stuff over and over and over again. But there's always something new, always something strange, always something different. And you never know what's going to happen, whether it's fun and frolicky, or it can get also very, you know, at the turn of a button, it can get dangerous as well. So you have to be really aware.
If I could jump.
There was a time a long time ago where I avoided, as a photo editor, ever using a protest photo to illustrate an issue. Like at, you know, over my dead body kind of attitude. And I have very much shifted that position as our spaces close. And in the United States, we might start seeing a much more oppressive, like, attitude towards public displays of protest if Trump wins. Like many people in many other countries with authoritarian regimes where protest and public speech are banned and people get arrested, and we could start seeing that here if our spaces continue to close and rights continue to be taken away. And just the ability to show up in public is something to celebrate. As much as sometimes I cannot stand performative protest photos to talk about an issue where there's really, really important work being done less dramatically, I actually, you know, have shifted my approach to it in the last, like, let's say 5 years.
So-
where just protesting is risking your life in some countries. It's starting to take on a heavier message in this country.
Yeah, and if that happens, I think the photographers who do this kind of work will have to stay and become even more courageous. I recently befriended an Iranian photographer who had to leave her homeland because the police caught her photographing them as they were arresting women for not wearing burqas. And they pointed lasers and guns at her apartment for 24 hours. And finally, she just said, we can't live here anymore. And she and her husband and child emigrated to the US. And that's, well, I don't think, well, let's hope it's not going to get that bad, but it was intimidation that was, it wasn't even whether it was a law or legal or you were actually going to get arrested. It was just the fear that was so induced, you know, upon her, you know, in a very, you know, provocative way where people knew exactly what they were doing. It's easy to see that being done here.
Okay, let's take a question from the audience here from Nicole DeMella. do you think anti-choice uses live stream more than pro-choice? And if so, why might photojournalism be a more effective pro-choice tool? I think it's sort of two separate questions. Are anti-choice using live stream more, but I think we agree that photojournalism through still photography is certainly a very powerful pro-choice tool, as we
I would
see
say-
here today.
I see a lot of anti-choice folks out there live streaming. A lot of them. I can't tell you all the organizations that they're with, but I can't even think of one pro-choice group that does that.
Oh, I know some. I definitely know some. And some of the clinic escorts that I've yeah, they live stream, but maybe not as much. But I can't really, I don't have any, I can't really speak to that because I don't really know. But I do know that I have seen some people live streaming on both sides.
Yeah, live streaming is definitely not about the art of the story. It's definitely about having an audience for when things go
At the
down.
moment, yeah.
And I feel like a lot of like far right Christian nationalists for sure are hoping something bad goes down and would like people to see it. And for others, it's a safety thing. It's just knowing that things are being seen by someone else if something happens or a crime's committed.
And they also, I know some members of groups that I'm with have been doxxed by folks that are taking video. I don't know that you see that on the pro-choice side. But it happens, and it's they've had threats, and it's been very serious.
Darren has a pretty interesting question about if things got more restrictive, what would sort of like what Evelyn has done in not showing faces, what would we do about showing faces and people in attendance because their identity could be a deterrent in some way, could be a challenge in some way, or could jeopardize them, especially with all the facial recognition kind of stuff happening? That's a good question. I haven't thought enough about that.
I mean, my instinct in public places, that it goes against my journalistic instinct.
Right, of course.
But you know, the clinic stuff, I feel like it's so hard for me to even gain access in a clinic that's like the way I just approach it, just because I don't spend weeks going to Texas, and you know, I have limited time, and then because women are in jeopardy, if a woman said you could photograph me, I definitely would, but I just don't push it. But I think it's like a very slippery slope to not show people's faces. You know, if you're in a public protest situation, I mean, obviously in foreign countries where in an authoritarian regimes, like your life is in danger. And hopefully that's not the way things are going to go here. But imagine looking at look at the March on Washington. If we couldn't see people's face, would that resonate? Would civil rights movement resonate with people if we didn't see people's faces? So the Black Lives Matter movement, this came up a lot for me in all the work I was doing, and I showed people's faces. If someone didn't want their photograph taken, there's 1,000 other people in the crowd. I absolutely don't need to piss somebody off and take their photograph. I just move on. But that's very concerning to me, and we're not there yet. So
the last action I covered, which was a pro-Palestinian ceasefire protest, all the protesters wore masks and kept their faces covered, and it was announced at the beginning of the rally for everybody to do that, to conceal their identity. And that's the first time I'd seen that in Boston.
Yeah, and that's, if someone does that, then great.
Right.
If you're worried, but if you're going to come out in public and make a public stand for something that you believe in, that's freedom of the press and freedom of expression and the First Amendment, all the things that are wrapped up in one. So that's, yeah. And I think now we are in a place where people wear masks for a lot of reasons. So that's a way to avoid dealing with that issue. But I don't as a photojournalist, feel that that is the way to think about covering dissent.
These discussions happened after George Floyd was killed and Black Lives Matter protests were happening. In Photo Choices, there were activist colleagues who thought that we shouldn't show any faces of any of the demonstrators because the police were going to use the photos. And I'm like, all of these photos are on the Getty site, like all of so, but it was like a principle. It's sort of like journalistic integrity, means, norms, the whole thing, versus what kind of activists have started to talk about. And it's a facial recognition software. It's the government using the photos as evidence against people because there were a lot of things that were happening during those protests. But I think when you're on the journalism side, you have to stick to journalism. When you're on the activism side, you can create a different set of rules about showing faces.
I agree with that, although I think we're using filters that are of the moment, and none of us really have the ability to predict where AI will go and in the hands of whom and how that stuff will get used. And you only have to look at, what goes on with revenge porn, for example, to begin to imagine how people can manipulate faces and people and content and do some real damage. And I'm not saying that we in photojournalism should compromise at all our standards or rights based on the First Amendment, but I do think it would be short-sighted to only react with, oh, this is how photojournalism does things, without thinking about unanticipated consequences, which is something this whole world is pretty good at not being able to do. I'm not being argumentative or advocating one way or another. I'm just saying we have no idea what's really going to come with this technology.
John Rudolph, did you have a comment? I kept muting you by mistake. I thought maybe...
No problem. I also am not professionally dressed. I didn't comb my hair this morning, so I've got my video off. I very strongly agree with Maggie. The whole business about self-censorship on the street and being told what we can or can't shoot by either side, it's completely contrary to anything most of us understand as journalism. But second, I've been doing this for a lot of years, and this seems to be a relatively new phenomenon. I was not faced with these kinds of threats or violence 5 years ago. And now it's everywhere in every kind of protest. And we simply have to stand our ground. I don't mean that in the legal sense. I think we have to stand our ground and make the best pictures we can, the most emotionally and intellectually grabbing pictures we can, with, at least here in the United States so far, relatively less concern for the consequences. It's not like if I take a picture of an Antifa kid, he's not going to be hanged for it the next day. And that could happen in Iran. I did this in Hong Kong and Paris and Bangladesh. You have to be a little bit circumspect. Here, less so. If you're on the street, you're fair game. If I'm on the street, I'm fair game. People take pictures of me all the time, and I'm sure they're hoping I'll do something bad and they can dox me. But that's the price of doing business.
You don't even have to be on the street and you're fair game if the person who's taking the picture is on the street. You can be in the privacy of your car, your home, your living room, your bedroom, doesn't matter.
No, you have reasonable expectation of privacy in your bedroom. You don't have it on the street.
All right, we're at just over 3 o'clock. Why don't we bring this to a close? I really want to thank our presenters and moderator who did an outstanding job.
Thank you.
Thank you for everybody in attendance
Thank you.
today. We will be sending out a link to the video. You've all been here today and you've had a chance to see it, but there are a lot of people who registered who couldn't make it, so they'll have an opportunity to see this. And check out the SDN website for all the upcoming talks that we have over the next few months, exhibitions and portfolio reviews. Thank you, Maggie, for moderating, and take care, everybody. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks, Glenn.
Thank you. Donate to SDN.
Thank you, Robin. Yay.